while we've got people here, we can go ahead and get started. My name is Rebecca Johnson. I'm one of the co-hosts of Supergirl Radio, which is a podcast about Supergirl. We cover the Supergirl TV series and all things Kal-El. Really, we talk about comics, we talk about the movies, the upcoming Flash movie that's coming out, the Helen Slater that came out in 1984. So we talk about all things Supergirl. So if you like Superman the animated series, if you like JLU, or anything related to Supergirl, we try to cover it. And that's a lot because she's been around since 1959. So that's where I'm coming from a super family perspective. I also have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/DuckmilkProd. I know that's kind of strange. But on Sunday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, I do live streams where I go over the critical reception of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. So if you're into film criticism and analyzing that stuff from an art criticism standpoint, it's actually pretty fascinating because you'd be really surprised about how stupid some of those reviews are. It's pretty bad considering a lot of people pulled their thoughts about Batman v Superman from Rotten Tomatoes. The top critics did not know what they were talking about if you actually read through those reviews. So if you're interested in that, I talk about film criticism and how we review films and cinema. So that's what I do. So if you want to hang out with me on Sunday nights, you can do that. And I have a great volunteer here. Charles, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello, my name is Charles. I'm a DC, and I'm kind of a DC nerd.
Same here.
Yeah, I'm only up here because my two homies, they forced me to do it. I remember when I first saw Man of Steel, I saw like, wow, this is way better than Transformers. Like, wow. And I was hyped when they were doing a shared universe like with Marvel. And I remember when I heard news of Batman v Superman, I was like, wow, I gotta see this. And I know it's kind of weird because they came out the same year as Civil War, and there was a lot of comparisons. Even though I like DC a little better, it's kind of hard to choose between the two. But I thought they were both good movies, and I thought they both did what they were supposed to do. I remember like what really got me into Superman was like when Superman Returns came out, and I watched the documentary of the science of Superman. That's what really got me into Superman. And I started watching shows like Smallville, which really like got me hooked into the DC. And I remember I bought Superman Returns on DVD, and I bought the game, and I was just blown away by the detail they put into each action scene whenever he does when Superman is out there doing the thing. It's nice, and this is my first time doing this. So
you're doing a great job. And one of the reasons that I wanted to open it up to everybody is because I've been doing this for a long time. And I would go to DragonCon every year. I still go to DragonCon every year. And boy, did people at DragonCon hate Zack Snyder movies. Oh, they just hate them. They just hate them. And after one panel that I did, I think it was after Batman v Superman came out, or maybe it was after Man of Steel came out. And there was just so much negativity about Man of Steel. Everybody in the room hated it but me, I felt like. And then after it was over, two people came up to me, like really quiet, like they were kind of whispering, like they didn't want other people to know it. And they told me how much they loved Man of Steel and how much they really connected with some of the characters. There was this woman who told me this sweet story about how she had a friend of hers who had a young son who had some, I think it was Asperger's syndrome, and how he had trouble. And she connected to the scene with Martha Kent. I always have to think Martha Wayne and Martha Kent. Martha Kent and young Clark in the school in Man of Steel, and how she kind of coaxes him out of the room because everybody's been kind of mean, and he hears it and sees everything, and he's scared. And I thought that was such a really interesting connection point for those people that they couldn't talk about that with all the hatred that was going around and all the negativity. But I thought that was such a sweet thing that somebody connected to those characters based on something that from their real life. And so it's been kind of my passion for the last 10 years to try to give voice to people who actually like this stuff, because a lot of it's been drowned out. So I welcome anybody to share your thoughts. If you love Man of Steel, this is your time to do it. The haters and the negativity, they've had their time. So if you have thoughts you want to share, please share them. Yeah, go ahead.
Alright, so first off, I just want to say, for Zack Snyder, for going to Zack Snyder, I can understand the way he does his films. I can understand why some people have issues with it. There are some moments that, yes, they are, the way he directs them aren't really that great. You can tell, like, there are some moments like they just don't work. But then when there are some moments then when he does try his best, it really does good. I mean, you could say the same with someone like Michael Bay, although then again, more people hate. I will say we all can hate more of Michael Bay's movies than Zack Snyder's stuff, And I like Zack Snyder. Not every project of his works, and there are some stuff that he directs them and all. It just didn't look good. But I still enjoy some stuff. But going to Man of Steel for 10 years, when I first saw Man of Steel, I can understand why people didn't like this as a good Superman. And I'm not saying it's perfect. It will never be as good as the first two Supermans of Christopher Reeve. That's by far. Let's face it. Those movies are magical and they're basically perfect. They're a little. I know it's like at this time it's a little bit cheesy, but they're still unique, and that's what makes Superman unique, Man, I get the direct where they're going, and I like it, but there's no denying there are some issues that just didn't sit well, which was mostly the way the editing is for the film. I mean, it just felt like a little. They tried to be too much like Batman Begins with the whole flashbacks and all that, which honestly wasn't really executed well. And then also the product placements. I'm sorry, I could not deal with all those product placements. Oh, 1 minute during IHOP. Oh, there's a Sears. Let's destroy a U-Haul over there. Let's destroy 7-Eleven. They were like going. It was like 1 minute Michael Bay just came in and just put all his advertisement in there.
Does anybody else have any thoughts that they want to share about, like, after they saw Man of Steel for the first time?
Well, I actually got a question.
Yeah.
Making sure that I'm not wrong. Man, still, who was the villain in that one?
General Zod.
Yeah.
Zod, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So I was right. Yes. All right. So, how did y'all feel about, like, because he killed him instead of, like, putting him in the Phantom Zone? You get what I'm saying? Like, how did y'all
Well, he
feel?
tried to.
Oh, you tried to?
Yeah,
Oh,
I mean, that was the initial plan, is that everybody was going to go into the Phantom Zone. And General Zod was not part of that when they were fighting. So then there was this alternate situation where he had to deal with it when he couldn't put them in there. So initially, in the film, that's the plan, that all the Kryptonians are supposed to go into the Phantom Zone. But,
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, the biggest.
Yeah. Charles, do you have any thoughts about that? About Superman having to make the tough decision to snap Zod's neck?
I remember when I first watched the scene, I actually felt sorry for General Zod because he was just trying to save his people. But the problem was Kryptonian society, that they were programmed. They didn't really have free will. Like they were like born into a caste and they couldn't really get out of it. So in a way, I believe it was a. Yeah, I understand why people hate it. The people say, "Oh no, Superman doesn't kill." Well,
Well, that depends on what Superman you're talking about.
Yeah.
He's killed many times.
Oh yeah. Like,
And it's usually General Zod.
You could
Yeah.
say the same with Batman
And a
too.
bunch of civilians.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, Charles.
That's a good point. Yeah. So in Man of Steel, yes, it is true that one could say he was a bit reckless, but you need to understand this is his first time being Superman. Like, he's still learning he's recently discovered some of his powers like flight, and with Zack Snyder's version of Man of Steel, they're trying to humanize him. Like, if a human being had all those powers, for instance, if someone was like about to kill your mom, this one person you love, how would you react? It's just and he remember again, this is his early years as Superman. So yeah, of course, he's gonna make mistakes, because he was raised by humans and he was he only knows how to deal with his emotions the way a human normally would, and add godlike powers to it. Yeah, there's going to be casualties. And I know that's one main reason why people hate the movies, and I understand that. I'm not mad at you if you say, wow, this is supposed to be Superman. He just murdered all those people, but again, and this is probably a lame excuse. It wasn't intentional, and I want to say the ends do justify the means, because if you're fighting for the first time in your life this other being who's as strong as you, how would you deal with it? You do it the best way. You do it the best way you can. So he's gonna make mistakes. So yeah.
Yeah, it was funny. After the first time that I saw it on a Thursday night, preview screening before it came out. They usually do those for fans or people who are really interested in it. And so I remember seeing it, and when he snapped his neck, I thought, oh, people are gonna hate this. And then right after, what I think saves that moment for me is that he falls to his knees and he cries out, and it's this huge guttural scream. And it's not something he wanted to do. He hated to do it. He felt terrible about it. I mean, this was the guy who was the last of his kind. He goes through this whole journey in the film where he's trying to figure out who he is. He goes, up into Canada and finds the ship that eventually becomes his Fortress of Solitude. And he's traveling the world trying to figure out who he is and what his powers can do. And so then he finally meets people who are like him. And they force him into this situation where he has to make a really tough decision. And one of the things that I wanted to do on this panel is talk about how Man of Steel updated Superman for a modern audience. And I think that can be one of the things that you could talk about, is that it makes it so that Superman is not fitting in like a little box. David S. Goyer, who's the screenwriter for Man of Steel, before the film came out, he would do these interviews where he talked about how Superman was encased in amber. Like if you see Jurassic Park and you see the little, I forget what it is.
The mosquito.
Yeah, the mosquito that's in amber. And that was Superman for such a long time that you couldn't bend him, you couldn't write him any kind of different way. He was just this one thing that had to be in this box. And what I think Man of Steel did, and especially with that moment, is that it opened the door for Superman to make hard decisions. Sometimes Superman, in some stories, he does the safe and easy thing because, you don't want to kill people, so we have to do the safe and easy thing. And this was a tough decision that even in the real world, police officers have to deal with. Military people have to deal with. This is not something that, is just a Superman thing. These are people who, just because a police officer or a military personnel has to make a tough decision, does that make them a horrible person? Superman is put in this situation where General Zod is going to heat vision a family of four, straight up heat vision murder these people. Yeah. And what is Superman supposed to do in this situation? He's already tried to fly him up into space and keep him up there, and he can't contain him. And General Zod says, "I'm never going to stop." So I actually kind of liked the way that they did that, because it opened up the door to allow Superman to go into a situation where he could make a tough decision. And to me, that opens up storytelling for him, that opens up characterization for him in a way that I don't think that happened before. I watch shows like Superman and Lois now on the CW, and that show is allowed to be serious, in my opinion, because Man of Steel kicked that door down. If Man of Steel had not kicked that door down, you would just see Christopher Reeve type mock-ups every time. You saw that with Superman Returns. He was just trying to be Christopher Reeve. And so I think that shows now are able to maybe not have him kill, but at least have him make tough decisions and be serious and have serious moments. Superman and Lois had some really serious, tough things that they have had to deal with. And I don't think if Man of Steel existed, that probably would not have happened. So I think one of the things that Man of Steel has done, what it did, was allowed Superman to get out of that amber encasement and allows people to tell different kinds of stories with him. So I'd be curious to hear what other people think that it did to sort of update it for the modern audience. Yeah. Back in the Blue.
Yeah, so I mean, I thought it was a pretty good movie. You know, I liked it. One thing that I thought that they could have done a little bit differently, and that they tried to maybe correct a little bit in Batman versus Superman, was kind of like the mindless destruction of tens of thousands of people that were in Metropolis, right? Superman can hear everything, he can see everything, you know, and if you remember back in like Superman 2, when, you know, they started going kind of against the populace of Metropolis, you could, you know, it was like really bothering Superman, and he tried to change locations, but, you know, even after the world engine was destroyed, you know, he just kind of kept the fight in Metropolis. And I know there's the four-person family, right? But, you know, what about the 100,000 people that got killed in, you know, the few minutes before that?
I think technically, according to canon, I think it was only like 3,000 to 5,000, technically, according to like BBS.
If you look how it was handled in Batman versus Superman, in that kind of like 9/11 type scene, you know, with Bruce Wayne at the beginning of the movie, right? They added a lot of emotion to all that destruction, but I felt like they kind of like glossed over that a little too much. The other thing that, you know, out of that movie, and maybe, you know, the ones that followed it, you know, usually with Superman, it's Superman pretending to be Clark Kent, or it's Clark Kent pretending to be Superman. I never really figured out, you know, what their take was. I really like Cavill in the role. I think he does a really good job with it. I don't know if he's always had the greatest, you know, scripts and editing and everything else to go along with it, you know, but that's something I never really got a sense of. There wasn't as much differentiation between Clark Kent and Superman.
Why does there have to be?
Well, otherwise
Aren't they the same
it's not a
guy?
disguise. It's not unless it's somehow magical, right? It's not a disguise, right? If you look the same and you act the same, you know, you have to have some really unintelligent people around you to not eventually figure it out, right?
Yeah.
So many jokes about it.
So what about
Well,
kind of like with Batman?
Can I address his comment
Yeah.
real quick? So the destruction. I'm curious. Have you ever seen the animated fight between Superman and Shazam?
Like the one where he says, where Shazam says Shazam has the lightning bolt go through Superman. That
They throw each other through buildings
Yeah.
in that. So what I thought was great about the way that Man of Steel executed the fight sequences is that it showed that there were real consequences to what that would be like. If you had two Kryptonians,
Oh yeah.
there would not just be, oh, well, we're not going to destroy any buildings and nothing would happen. There would be buildings destroyed, that there would be consequences to that. They're the most powerful beings in the universe, in the DC universe. I'm sure some people might disagree with that, but Kryptonians, I believe, are the most powerful beings in the universe. And there would be consequences to that. I like that it wasn't played as if it would be unbelievable. That to me is believable. The way that the film showcases, like when they hit each other, there are shockwaves that come with that.
Yeah.
And so I appreciated that from the standpoint of nobody's talking down to me about this. You know, somebody is actually showing me what this would look like. And they took great strides to talk about in the behind the scenes stuff. Zack Snyder talks about how they created a power list. So they would know, like, if Superman gets, you know, hit like this, it's going to feel like this. Like it's going to have a certain amount of weight to it. Or if Superman does this, it's going to, you know, have a little more weight to it. You know, it's going to have different power that's going to come with it. You know, when he gets shot with a missile from the plane, how is it going to impact him? So there's all that's taken into consideration with that. It doesn't bother me because, to your point about Batman v Superman, we see that there were people on the ground saving people. It wasn't just up to Superman to do that. Now, of course, we don't see some of that. Well, no, we do see some of that in Man of Steel. Perry and Jenny and Steve Lombard have to help each other. So that, to me, I thought was actually really cool, because then you can see that it's not just Superman. Superman's doing the heavy lifting because he's the only one who can. But there are people on the ground, just like it would be in real life. And that's what I like about this in terms of a modern audience. It's trying to show what it would be like if Superman was real. Some of the other interpretations of Superman is that it's kind of a fantasy, it's kind of a cartoonish thing, or it's kind of a, you know, it's almost like a fairy tale. It's not, you know, in the real world. And so I think what Man of Steel was trying to do was to show what it would be like if we walked out of these buildings and there was a real guy wearing a cape and flying around and shooting the heat vision out of his eyes, what would that be like to the world? And so I think that that's one of the things that's really cool, is that not only do we get to see Superman save the world in that awesome World Engine moment where he, crashes that, that John Peters mechanical spider that he finally got in Man of Steel, but we get to see 3 normal human beings helping each other and comforting each other when they thought they were going to die. So to me, I like the real world aspect of that, and it doesn't bother me so much because a lot of those buildings, I'm pretty sure, were evacuated. Perry, when things are happening, Perry tells the Daily Planet staff, okay, it's time, we got to go. And so you see people out in the streets, and so I just like it because it feels like it's an actual take on what it would be like if Superman was real. Yes, in the back.
Yes, how do you feel about the future now, about Superman and the whole thing with what just happened and everything?
In terms of the Flash movie or the Black Adam?
Like Henry Cavill, the whole rebooting thing.
Right. Yeah, I have thoughts on that, but I'm going to pass it to Charles first because I'm curious about your thoughts.
Well, so what I know about the Flashpoint storyline, as we all know, unfortunately, Henry Cavill will no longer be reprising the role as Superman. So I think what they're going to do is, because I don't know if any of you read the comic or watched the animated movie. So what happens is the Flash goes back in time to save his mom from being killed by, I believe, the Reverse Flash, or I never read the comic, but I believe it was the Reverse Flash.
I think it is. You're right.
Yeah. And that creates ripples through time, and and so that's why Bruce Wayne dies, and his father becomes Batman, and his mom becomes the Joker, and other major time events that would eventually prove catastrophic to the future of humanity, like Atlantis and fight, and that's destroying the world. So the Flash, came to his senses, went back in time to stop himself from saving his mom. Then that reset the whole universe. So I believe they're going to use that to reboot the DCEU as well. And personally, I think that's kind of a smart move, because to my shock, they actually want Ezra Miller as the Flash, despite what he did. So at least that way, they can even though it's a rebooted universe, they can still keep Ezra Miller, but have different people play as these iconic heroes, as in Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman.
Yeah, just to answer your question, I have really sour feelings about Warner Brothers. I think and of course, you wouldn't expect, I guess, movie executives to be the most upstanding people, I guess. But the way that they treated Zack Snyder during the Justice League stuff, where they basically shoved him out the door after his daughter committed suicide, I thought that was one of the most disgusting things I've ever heard of. And then they did kind of not to that degree, but a very similar thing to Henry Cavill, where they instructed him to tell everybody that Superman was coming back, that he would be Superman again, and then not too long after that, they yanked him from the universe and said, nope, you got to hang up the cape, you're not in this anymore. And I just thought that was low class. So I'm not real keen on them at the moment. I think they could show a little more compassion and understanding with people, even if that wasn't the direction that they wanted to go anymore. And my opinion about the Henry Cavill thing, and he's my favorite Superman. He's the first time I've ever seen a Superman be the kind of Superman I wish he was. He trusts Lois. He doesn't lie to Lois. He actually, the way he's portrayed is just, I never got to really see a Superman I really connected with until Henry Cavill. So for him not to be there anymore and to be so unjustly let go like that is devastating for me personally, but I understand what they're doing. Like, I understand that they don't want to go that route anymore, and so they're trying to start over. My confusion, though, is that they're getting rid of some people and keeping other people. And so I would, my thing is, if you want to reboot it, I understand you want to reboot it, then completely reboot it. Don't keep Amanda keep Amanda Waller from the DCEU. Don't keep Ezra Miller's The Flash. Don't keep, Jason Momoa's Aquaman. Get rid of everyone and start completely over. And so it doesn't sound like that's what they're doing. It sounds like it's like a mix of things. So I'm very confused about it, I guess. I'm open-minded, but very confused.
Forget they also.
Yeah, in the back.
Well, I'm kind of confused on the direction they're going because again, I'm not as heavy in DC as you guys are, but I do love Man of Steel. But my take on this whole rebooting thing was the universe was changing more to focus on Supergirl because they're having a different take on Supergirl, and that whole timeline is a lot different. That has, Clark Kent totally in a different place where he's not really the Superman like we think he is, and it's focusing more on her. So I kind of saw like, oh, I see why they're putting him out, because maybe they're going in the direction of her. So I have no clue what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I don't think any of us really know. I'm sure James Gunn has a plan. He's kind of announced the things that he wants to do, and one of those things is a Supergirl movie, which I'm actually very excited about. Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow is one of the best comic books I've ever read.
It's going to be different. She's not the icon.
Well, we don't know that. We don't know that either. That's still kind of up in the air. But yeah, so the I'm sorry, I just blanked on what you were talking about. Repeat just a small sample of what you just said.
Oh, I was just saying that her hair was.
Oh yes, so Supergirl. So what I had heard originally was that they wanted to reboot the universe and have Supergirl and Batgirl kind of fill in for Superman and Batman.
Yeah.
That I think was the original thing, but then they scrubbed the Batgirl movie. And so I don't know if those plans have changed. There's definitely a Supergirl in the Flash movie, which I'm really excited about. I am a little nervous about how that's going to go down because I don't know what that says about where Henry Cavill's Superman is. I guess TBD at the moment until we all see it. But I think that was the initial plan, was that Supergirl was going to kind of take up that space. But as a Supergirl fan, I have actually kind of find that a little insulting. It's like Supergirl and Superman are completely different characters. I know they both wear the S, and I know they're both Kryptonian, but they're not just they're not replaceable. They're not
interchangeable.
You cannot interchange them, and I find that insulting on behalf of Superman and Supergirl. I don't like that. But that's kind of what I think they were going to do. But I think the Flash movie is going to be a good indication of where things are heading. They know more about it than we do, of course. So I guess we'll see it when it happens.
Yeah, I was sad when Henry Cavill was let go. That hurt me a lot.
Yeah, I just kind of felt like, those, some people think that like Man of Steel and Batman v Superman and some of the films that followed didn't make any money, and they were actually way more profitable than Phase 1 of the MCU. So I kind of think that it would be nice for Warner Brothers just to give him one last hurrah, one last kind of thing. But who knows what's going to happen.
There were so many projects that Henry Cavill could have been in Superman. I know they had so much planned for him, but because ever since Justice League, it's like, oh, how about we focus on all these other solo characters? And I think that's probably one of the reasons why we just don't see as much of Henry Cavill Superman. And then of course you have all these others, like especially with the CW, like they introduced their own Superman, and everybody fell in love with Taylor Hitchett. I mean, I love Taylor Hitchett. He's a great Superman. But
Tyler Hoechlin. Yeah.
Yes, but like you said, we had so much promises for him, and and when we saw the true version of the Justice League, Zack Snyder one, you saw a very great, accurate Superman. Like this was like Zack Snyder's like he had a whole plan for Superman. Like he had this whole arc and now it's like, okay, we're gonna draw all of this away. Everything I had planned for a lot of these projects that I wanted to do was oh god, oh, you wanted to see Jeffrey Dean Morgan as Batman? Nope, that's going away because, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love how we're getting Michael Keaton back as Batman. I mean, he's the greatest Batman of all time. So,
debatable.
But he is one of the best, though. He is one of the best.
He was my first Batman, so I have a special place in my heart.
Me too.
Yeah.
On the silver screen, yeah.
Yes.
Can I bring it back to Man of Steel?
Yeah, please. Yeah, we'll talk about favorite scenes and stuff like that. So yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering, having the different take on it with Jonathan Kent passing away. At some point, it was you go back and forth, but having like both dads, help out and go from one to the next. Like, what's kind of the story there?
Yeah, I think that's awesome because if you think about it, the dads are connected. Jor-El and Jonathan are kind of connected because they both died early, and they both Jor-El's murdered, and Jonathan gives up his life to protect Clark's secret, but he grows up without both of them. And then his mothers have a kind of a similar thing too, because Laura and Martha are both widowed. And one of the things I loved about Man of Steel is that Laura on Krypton got a lot of screen time. She was very active. In the stories I've watched and seen, there's not a lot of focus on Laura. There's a lot of focus on Jor-El, but you don't see her much. And she was the one who made the decision to activate the ship to send him to Earth. She's the one who stands, and is there when General Zod is sentenced and sent to the Phantom Zone. And I just really love that portrayal of her. And so the moms are connected and the fathers are connected. And Jor-El is actually, I like the take in Man of Steel because he's usually an artificial intelligence. Most often depicted like in the Fortress of Solitude where you put the crystal in and he starts talking. But I thought this one was, and I guess the same kind of thing happens in Man of Steel where he puts the command key in and that sort of activates the ship. But that AI is so clever, and you could nitpick it and think, well,
it's predictive text.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you could nitpick it like, well, why didn't he get an AI of Laura? Like, come on, couldn't you have his mother there? Yeah, so you could nitpick it that way, but one of my favorite scenes in all of the film is the sequence where Superman and Lois Lane got to go to space, and that is like the coolest thing, because that pretty much never happens. Maybe it's happened in some Silver Age story that I've never read, but Lois Lane going to space is like the coolest thing, and shooting Kryptonian weapons, by the way. But Lois gets to meet Jor-El. And she interacts with Jor-El, and Jor-El helps her off the ship. And I think the way that they utilized him was just executed really well, because he not only helped Clark or Kal find himself and understand himself better, but he's also very connected to him finding his ability to be Superman. He helps him, sends him off to save Lois after she's gone on the escape pod and things like that. So I really love Jor-El and Laura in there, and I think that they are used in a really great way to explain Kryptonian culture and heritage that I think you mentioned. I mean, that Kryptonian sequence at the beginning is like 20 minutes long.
So I'm about to say that's the most world building I've seen from Kryptonian.
I mean, they had,
The culture and whatever, genetics, stuff like that. A lot of stuff was new, to me at least.
Yeah, a lot of it's borrowed from like the John Byrne Man of Steel from back in the 80s. So like the Genesis Chamber and things like that you can see some of that. What's new, I think, somebody could fact check me, but I think the idea that Kal-El was the first natural born baby on Krypton, that might be new. I'd have to research that, but I like the way that's used because it basically makes Superman the embodiment of free will. There's a theme throughout the film where he's making these choices on his own free will. He's not. I think he mentioned the caste system, like on Krypton, they had to be warriors, or they had to be this, or they had to be this.
Genetically programmed that way.
Right. And so Superman is actually, he can find his own destiny. He can decide what he wants to be, what Superman means.
Get the different jobs.
Yep. And you see that in the Kryptonian sequence with Zod and his forces and the High Council of Krypton, those kinds of things. So the Kryptonian stuff I think is excellent because, to your point, to me, it feels like a real place where real living beings lived. Some of the other like more frozen Arctic Krypton depictions, feels like nobody would actually really live there. Would you actually live in that? I mean, maybe you would acclimate to a cold climate, I guess. But they have like Haraka, that big beast that Jor-El flies on to, get from one place to, I mean, there's other animal living creatures there. So maybe they didn't do the best job with their environment and it kind of went badly for them in the end. But I do like that it depicts real living, it feels like a lived in place. And so I think that that's really cool. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I also like to add that Krypton is actually a mirror representation of what could happen to us if we're not careful. And I thought that that's a great it's a great message. Yes, Superman's cool, and the idea of Superman himself is cool. I also like how it used Krypton to give us to show us our possible future if we're not careful, or if we if we exhaust our resources, or we become too arrogant, or we don't heed warning signs, to answer your question, Kal-El was actually the first natural born to be born in centuries. Back in the past, they did allow it, but I guess when Krypton advanced more, they said, this seems better, and obviously they were wrong. I thought that Krypton did whoever came up with the idea to help us dive more into Krypton. I think it's also a great warning to us, so that way we don't make the same mistake. And you might be like, oh no, it's science fiction. Well, how often does science fiction become science fact? Because now we're getting close to flying cars. Now we have AI. So I think that's one great reason to delve more into Krypton, in my opinion.
Yeah, I like your use of the word arrogance. There was definitely some of that with some of the, and I like the depiction of the High Council. Everything that they wear is like high. It's like real frilly, and it's kind of gaudy if you wanted my taste. But everything is very. We want to show ourselves being the High Council. We think we're better than all these people, and they didn't listen to Jor-El, and so that was their downfall. Is that they didn't let aside their arrogance and be humble. So I think that's a really good point. The thing about Krypton that was pretty cool after Man of Steel came out, and I think one of the questions that I wanted to ask and talk about is Man of Steel's influence on other Superman media. And not too long after Man of Steel came out, I can't remember the date, but Sci-Fi made a TV show called Krypton. And unfortunately, it lasted for 2 seasons. But I think we get that version of Krypton because of Man of Steel. David S. Goyer was highly involved with that. It was a little bit of a different story. It wasn't really tied to Henry Cavill's Superman, but that one really, if you've never seen Sci-Fi's Krypton, it digs into a lot of Kryptonian things, and it's the Brainiac on that one, man, that is good. That Brainiac is good. Super creepy, but he is excellent. But I think that was one of the things that came after Man of Steel, that people liked that Kryptonian sequence, that Krypton sequence so much that they were like, well, let's make a TV show about it. So I thought that was really cool.
And wasn't Steppenwolf in it? Or is it not Steppenwolf, but the other biker?
Oh, Lobo.
Yes, Lobo.
The main man.
Yes, and Lobo was great. They actually did a pretty authentic, very character correct, comic book accurate Lobo. He even has like the skull and the belt and everything. So Lobo's really good in that too. So it's really interesting to me to look at how Man of Steel kind of influenced other things. I think you see a little bit of the influence in the comics. I talk about the Supergirl TV series all the time. They basically blatantly ripped off some shots for Man of Steel. There's a fight between Supergirl and Astra in the air where they're like punching each other, and I'm like, it looks like it's just a repackaged shot for Man of Steel.
What about when Laura Kara is in the bar, just like in Superman 3.
Yeah, they borrowed from a lot of different Superman media, but Man of Steel, I think, the way that they would depict Supergirl flying early in season 1 when they had a budget from CBS. After they moved to the CW, they didn't have much of a budget anymore, and the effects were not as great. But in CBS, when they had lots of money, they would show. And I don't think this has been the case in any other Superman media, but the way that Zack Snyder chose to depict flight at the speed of sound was so awesome, and they do that in season 1 of Supergirl. And the reason that it looks like that is the way it looks kind of like it has something coming off of him, is that jets, when they break the speed of sound, it looks like that for the jets. And so it's an actual realistic depiction of what it would look like if flight was really that powerful and that fast. And so flight is one of those things that I think Man of Steel also maybe modernized a little bit, because also in Man of Steel, flight is kind of turbulent. You know, when Superman saves Lois and they're trying to get away from like being sucked in into some things, and it's not like, you know, in Superman the movie when Superman and Lois are flying and she's reciting the poem. It's not like that. It's turbulent and kind of chaotic and violent, and I actually like that because it shows like what it would be. I mean, if you've flown on a plane, you know that planes have turbulence all the time, and sometimes it's not pleasant. I've had bad turbulence before and thought we were going to crash. So flight at that powerful level, if it's like that in an airplane, it would be even heightened. So I really like the depiction of flight in Man of Steel, and I think that it made it. I think it inspired people to think about flight differently, I guess is what I'm trying to say, because I did see some of that in the Supergirl TV series as well. I guess as we're kind of heading into the home stretch of this, does anybody have any favorite scenes or moments in Man of Steel? Yeah.
I don't have a favorite moment, but I do remember watching Man of Steel. Apparently my brother and I took it, my dad, to see it on Father's Day, and here's the thing, he's an architect. So it was just hilarious seeing him nearly having a heart attack, seeing all the destruction when saw it in Superman War 5. I just remember the moment.
Yeah, I can imagine an architect is like, no, what are you doing? Yeah, go ahead.
So I will admit, one of my personal favorite, I will admit, this is actually one that the majority can agree on, is when Superman takes his first flight, like he's learning how to fly. I will admit that was executed. Granted, some of the camera work was a little off, but for the most part, I like how you seeing him for the first time, you know, learning to fly. Like, well, first he was jumping, trying to jump very high, and then
just like comic book Superman.
Yeah, and then boom, just like that, he flies. So I will admit, at least we get to see him learning to fly and all. Unlike Superman, where, you know, he's like, oh, Superman. I mean, I know they say he had years of training and all, but you know, that was all off screen. Whereas Man of Steel, you actually get to see him fly, and I will admit that is pretty cool. You know, seeing him for the first time, you know, like, you know, doing like this, and you even see him smile and all.
Yeah, Henry Cavill Superman smiles. Don't listen to anybody else who says he doesn't. One of the things that's cool about that sequence is that he flies like over Africa, and you see the zebras and stuff. That's borrowed a little bit from Mark Waid's Birthright comic book. You see some of that. So some of the comics are kind of making their way into that sequence, which is really cool. I guess, Charles, do you have a favorite scene in Man of Steel?
Okay. Well, I actually have two. One with the flight scene, and the second one was when he fights General Zod.
Yes.
I got the idea that if Zack Snyder directed an episode from Dragon Ball Z, it would be great, because whenever Zod and Superman were fighting, I instantly saw Dragon Ball Z, just the way they were punching and what people might not know is that they do a form of martial arts between Zod and Superman. I was like, but it wasn't just like, you know, like throwing cars or just, you know, smashing. No, there's actually actual technique or effort put into the fight scenes, and that's one thing I like. I know that it's also the scenes that some people hate because, again, back to topic of Superman destroying cities, but again, this is the first time being Superman, so it's natural to see. So I believe it would make sense for him to do that when this is your first time being Superman. You're fighting these like beings who are as strong as you are.
Yeah, it's funny. Everybody harps on the Man of Steel destruction, and within the last couple of years, I went back to watch the Avengers, the first Avengers that Joss Whedon. The Hulk runs through an office building full of people, and no one talks about that, which I found way worse. So I mean, those are. I mean, the Zod Superman fight at the end, the sort of the Battle of Metropolis. One of the coolest shots is actually when Zod is like a mad dog at some point. He's like climbing up the buildings. And so that's just very unique in the way that they would show that. And to your point about the different fight styles, General Zod is a general. Man of Steel was the first time that, because like Terrence Stamp in Superman 2, like he's called General Zod, but is he really a general? I don't know. But this one, like he's given orders to people. He's a good fighter. And so I think I actually bought him as an actual general. Let's see. Let's go here.
So yeah, with you said General Zod, right? So the speech he gave Kal-El, Superman, when he basically was saying what you're saying about him being a general and him honing all his senses, and that Kal-El hasn't really trained as how he has as being a general. And I think that was like a really good point, even though it wasn't like cool, I guess, but it was just how he said it. It was true. Yeah. And it was just like, wow, like you learn how to levitate right then and there.
What did you grow up on a farm?
Right.
Yeah.
And he just started flying right then and there, like honing all his senses and stuff like that. And then also my favorite scene was the first fight as well, was when he was at his house.
Oh yeah, so when he goes to find the Codex and he encounters Martha.
Yep, and then it was good because it was really like 3-on-1, and then until Zod left, and it was still 2-on-1, and it was like I like they didn't overpower him as well, because I don't really like overpowered protagonists, because it kind of makes it kind of boring. But yeah, he was getting beat up, and then it was kind of then he comes back, so it was like it wasn't too overpowered, and I liked it.
Yeah, one of the most memorable scenes in that sequence is that Superman fight. Well, first of all, Martha Kent gets to tell General Zod to go to hell, and that's the coolest thing Martha Kent's ever done. But then when it looks like Martha's going to be in trouble, Superman flies in so fast, and then he has that, he takes him in the cornfield. Do you think you can threaten my mother? And that is such a good sequence. Now there is some destruction in that, people go through silos.
He said it while he was punching.
Yeah, but to see that the speed of that. I think it's pretty cool, and that's a young Kal-El fighting him too. That's kind of a reckless Superman, just because he's so it's emotional for him. His mother's being attacked, so yeah, those are some good moments. Yeah, back in the back.
Yeah, when I saw it in 2013, I loved the whole movie, and of course I got it on Blu-ray, and it definitely blew me away for today's generation's Superman. And I always will love Christopher Reeve's first two. And I like the other two too because I was just a kid in the 80s, so I didn't know any better then. But yeah, definitely Henry Cavill Superman took it to the next level for sure.
Yeah. Over the moon.
I like the oil rig scene. It seemed like it was really good for character building. Wasn't quite clear whether he was fully powered at that point. I don't know that he really knew his own limits, and so when he did that, I don't think he knew whether it was really going to work. And obviously, based on the getting passed out at the end of the scene, he obviously went up to his limits, And so I thought that was a good scene because he was, he was courageous, not really understanding what he was doing, but doing the right thing. So I thought that was a good scene for, because they kind of did that whole character development pretty fast to get him to adulthood, and that was a good scene along the way to show some growth.
How cool is it that Superman would try to save those people even if he didn't know he could? That's pretty cool. That's a great scene. Yep.
And I kind of like the entire sequence where he's not Superman yet, but he's just doing good things. He's just saving people because he's and I think of it as almost the flip side of what you said earlier about how you couldn't tell if he was Clark Kent or Superman pretending to be who.
Yeah.
And I think that sequence kind of helped with that in that you saw him progressing. He's not Superman yet. He doesn't have a costume. He doesn't have an identity. He's just doing things to help people. And you see that like progression into Superman.
As when he was a Superboy, when he saved his peers from the bus and all that.
Oh yeah. Oh, we didn't even talk about him saving Pete Ross in that bus sequence. That's one of the best. When young Clark Kent goes into the water to kind of save the bus, and he pushes the bus, and that Hans Zimmer score comes in. And I love that sequence because even though Pete Ross and some of those kids on the bus had previously been calling him names, had been bullying him on the bus, Clark still saved that kid's life.
It reflected the bar scene too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
The guy was a
Yeah,
jerk.
yeah.
And then
He messed up that.
instead of beating him to the ground, he, messed with his truck.
Well, that guy had been drinking too, so really he saved him a DUI.
Yeah.
So he was getting him off the road essentially.
But yeah.
Yes, he did.
And so then he learns down the later, okay, I'm gonna keep it cool inside and out and not do this.
Yeah, I mean, you have to learn. You're not going to be Superman day one. Like, you got to figure it out. I guess since we're kind of getting close to time, I was curious about everybody's thoughts because we're now 10 years out of Man of Steel. It's been 10 years later, and I've noticed that Zack Snyder films tend to have a different perception of them about 10 years later. When Watchmen had its 10th anniversary in 2019, I saw a lot of articles that were like, Zack Snyder's Watchmen is actually a really great film. It's like, yeah, I knew that 10 years ago. So that tends to happen with Zack Snyder films. People are not. It's like Superman. They're not quite ready for him yet. So I'm curious about everybody's thoughts. Like, do you talk to your friends about it? Have they changed opinions? And have you heard about that? And how do you think that the film holds up today, 10 years later? Does it still hold up? So I guess I'll pass it to Charles first. Do you think Man of Steel holds up 10 years later?
Oh yes, most definitely. As a matter of fact, when I saw the reviews and when I compared it to what I really felt inside, I made a funny quote saying, Man of Steel was the super movie we deserve, but not quite the one we needed right now. I got that from The Dark Knight. I felt kind of accurate, but yeah, I think it will still hold up because it did something different, now. Like, I think it broke the Superman trend of trying to be like, oh, jolly and happy, and the one with Christopher Reeve did have a few sad moments, but I believe with Man of Steel. And it showed the reality that life ain't like sunshine and rainbows. What Dad said, there will be a light at the end of the tunnel, Back when young Clark Kent was being bullied, and he felt, and people were were gossiping about him, and back to what you were saying earlier, back when he found the strength to save this one. These kids who were bullying him, I think that sort of the strength of character. Now people complain that I don't really know who Clark Kent is. Well, this is probably isn't really a good explanation, but if you look at his parents who are Christian, I think that helps to explain why he is the way he is, why he helps people, and. I might be wrong, but I feel like that plays a part into who he is. So I will. So I remember and I remember when the movie first came out, I constantly I was rewatching it. Even when I was having a bad day, I would watch it and I feel better. So yeah, I definitely think that this is easily one of the greatest most underrated movies that I've seen.
That's so interesting to hear your perspective on that, to say that when you're having a bad day, watching it makes you feel better. Because not too long after Man of Steel came out, about 6 months later, I was diagnosed with stage 3 HER2 positive breast cancer. And so I went through chemo, radiation, surgeries, all that stuff. And I had Man of Steel on. Back then, I had DVDs, and I hadn't progressed to Blu-rays by that point. But I watched it when I would go to bed because it was like comfort food, a metaphorical comfort food to me, because it made me. Some days it was kind of hard to sleep, and so that kind of like lulled me into like a comfort place, and it made me feel better that Superman saves the world and makes everything better, and so that's funny. I think it's interesting that the two of us, at least, have had that situation, because a lot of people claim that Man of Steel is dark, that it's gloomy, that it's grim, but there's actually, to me, that's where you find the hope in something, is that if you have this dark place, but then you overcome it, that's where the hope is. And so that's really cool to hear your story on that, and to know that at least inspired you and made you feel better, because I think that's the thing that I connect to with Man of Steel. So thank you for sharing that. Does anybody have any, last thoughts about how the film will age well, or has it aged well? I guess in the back?
Yes. I lost my dad in 2013, and when I did see it months after, it did give me hope and everything, and it definitely made me feel better about life and whatnot, and with about Watchmen, I saw that in the theater and have that on Blu-ray as well.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that helped you kind of get through that part with your father passing away, so I'm sorry to hear that, but Man of Steel is actually a great movie about dads and sons. So I hope you watch that and think about your dad. Yeah.
So when I first saw it 10 years ago, I thought it was a really, really good Superman movie. But as I got older and all, I started to study more movie critiques and started studying films and all. So when I finally saw it again over and over, I like it, but there's no denying it does have its problems. You have to admit it's not a perfect film. It's not like and I still enjoy. I will admit, I just guess it's because I just guess it was just poor timing, I guess, because it's just like Man of Steel just felt like a little too much like Batman Begins, to kind of like the whole dark. And I get why people think that you just came out of Dark Knight Rises, now you have Man of Steel. No, this just felt like this is too much like like Christopher Nolan's take on the Dark Knight trilogy, tried to be more realistic, dark and all. But I get why people like it and all, and I do enjoy it. It's just and over time, I'm sure people will grow to like it, but as long as you have all these other comic book films that that or like other interpretations that people will feel like, oh, this is how the true version of Superman and all, or all these characters and all, it's like Man of Steel people will still remember Man of Steel. Just it will either people will just love it or they just don't like it. That's all it is.
Even if somebody, I'm of the opinion, even if somebody hates your film, at least they're talking about it. The worst thing you can be as a filmmaker is make a film that is just forgotten and thrown into the void. No, I agree. I don't think Man of Steel is a perfect film. The only thing I really don't like about it is the dialogue between Superman and Lois when they kiss. Yeah. I'm like, that doesn't even make sense from her perspective. They could have just not said anything. That's the only thing I'd probably change about it. So no, I don't think it's a perfect film.
It always goes downhill after the first
it's stupid dialogue. That would be the only thing I would change. Just have them kiss. It's fine. They're very rare perfect films. So a lot of films like that I love, they're not perfect either, but I still love them. So I think that there is something to that. Yeah, in the back.
I think it will. It'll pair well with more so in Christopher Nolan's Batman. Like I see that just in age more so than the rest of the universe, or that part of the universe, Batman. So yeah, I think between the Batman, we call it Dark Knight, and Man of Steel, I can see those pairings just over the course of the next 20 plus years being referred back to in things like these.
Yeah, what I think is so interesting about now the current time that we're in with these DC films, like we're heading into the Flash movie that's coming up, whether people like it or not, it's happening. But the Flash movie is going to be heavily taking from Man of Steel. General Zod we saw in the trailer. We saw the World Engine in the trailer. And I've always held the opinion of if we just waited long enough, people would have a nostalgia for Henry Cavill and that version of Superman. And I think in my opinion, we're seeing that now. I am very curious, even though I'm very nervous about the Flash movie, I'm very curious what people's reactions will be when they see General Zod when we get to the Flash movie. Are they going to be excited to see that stuff again? Because it's basically going to be repeating some of the same sequences. So the nostalgia factor, I think, is kicked in now, 10 years on. And so I think it's really interesting that now we're starting to see people, or I am anyway, I shouldn't speak for everybody, but I'm starting to see people excited about Man of Steel because they're seeing it sort of revisited. Thank you, everybody, for sharing all of your thoughts. One of the things that came, oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I saw Black Adam, right? So like the ending cutscene of Black Adam,
right?
You know, they actually had the guy come back to play that.
Yes.
I'm bad with names. I'm sorry.
No, that was Henry Cavill.
Yeah. Right. He came back and played. I was like, oh snap! And I heard that Dwayne Rock fought for him.
He did.
Because they wasn't gonna let him, you know. And it was like, doesn't matter what you think. And then they let him. They let him play.
I think Dwayne Johnson understands how people would be excited about Superman fighting Black Adam.
And I was when I saw that.
Awesome.
Only for you only seen him one last time.
Yeah. Well, I'll just leave you with something that I saw from a Rotten Tomatoes interview after Man of Steel came out. One of the people who actually worked for Rotten Tomatoes, which gave it a bad rating because the percentages with art criticism is so stupid. I can't stand it. But the woman who worked for Rotten Tomatoes said, I don't know what everybody's saying. It's a good movie. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.